Welcome to the Dr. Todd Talks Tunes show, everyone. I am your host, Dr. Todd Samra, and today we are talking about the music of Wagner, Richard Wagner. What better introduction could we possibly have than the funeral march from the end of Götterdämmerung than that? That's like as good as it gets. So welcome, everyone. Today we are talking about where is the Wagner today? Previously, we had an episode called The Mozart Paradox, where we explored where is the Mozart today. And we essentially came up with two answers for that. One, there is no Mozart, and that there's 10,000 Mozarts. And actually, based on responses from people that watched the video, ultimately, I can come to the conclusion that Jacob Collier is probably the closest thing that we have to a Mozart today. So, what about other composers? Who would be the Wagner of today? Who would be the Beethoven of today? Things like this. So in kind of thinking about Wagner, there's a broader answer, I think, that's one worth talking about. So that's why we're doing our show today, which is entitled Spielberg as Wagner. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Richard Wagner. He's born in 1813 in Leipzig, and he dies in 1883 in Venice, Italy. So he's a German composer. He's a Leipziger, which is also the city of Mendelssohn, who was born just a few years before in 1809, also in Leipzig. So if we look at the music of Wagner, we see these grand works, these operas, music dramas, as he called them. And this was the primary part of his output as a composer. He wrote some songs, he wrote some other works, but primarily he wrote these gigantic music dramas, these gigantic operas. And of course, Wagner was involved in every aspect in creating the opera. For one, he wrote the libretto, which is a little bit unusual. That's not something that we commonly see composers writing their own librettos or the text. He also, like in the example of the operas that make up the Ring cycle, the mythology they're based on, the parts of the mythology he didn't know or didn't understand, he just made up. That sounds a little bit like Jurassic Park, almost like exactly. Frog DNA. So he's creating frog DNA to come up with the mythology, but he doesn't stop there. He's involved in the costume design, the set design. In the very theater in Bayreuth where these operas were performed, he designed the theater and the pit to be a dais formation to put the louder instruments farther away and deeper into the pit and to put the singer high up on the stage. And so he's involved in the design of the theater. So he's a control freak, and he had a word for this. He called it Gesamtkunstwerk, which essentially means like complete artwork. And so he saw himself as kind of the head, the captain of a ship that was in charge of all aspects of things on that ship, not just the music. So we look at Wagner, I don't want to get too caught up in the Tristan chord and the music theory behind that. We can also look at other things like his use of leitmotif, writing with leitmotif, which is something that people don't really do today, but not to get overburdened with some of these aspects of Wagner as a composer, and just really kind of focus on him as this captain, the complete artwork creator for these music dramas. Well, who would that be today? We could maybe make an argument that it's John Adams, the composer who's a brilliant composer and written great operas, but it's not quite the same magnitude because nowadays opera is not the highest all-complete art form that it was during the 19th century and Wagner's lifetime. Instead, that's been replaced today by films, by movies. This is really our highest art form in that it involves all of the other arts, choreography and set design and special effects, but acting and drama and music and literature and all these different things. So if we're really looking for the Wagner of today, we shouldn't be looking at a composer of music. We should be looking at film directors. There are 3 film directors that I would actually like to discuss today in relation to this. And we're going to start with Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings. And he's kind of the one that sort of came to my mind first because those Lord of the Ring movies are so Wagnerian. And James Newton Howard, writing the score, uses a lot of Wagnerian style music there. So that was kind of the first one. But in really making this comparison, King Kong was great, but he hasn't really made enough movies yet to maybe to fill the shoes of Herr Wagner. So then that takes me to Star Wars and to George Lucas, and I'm wearing a Millennium Falcon shirt today. So we can look at his output, but we end up with something similar. I mean, really, Lucas is responsible for creating probably the greatest movie franchise of all time in Star Wars. But are these movies the greatest movies of all time? Critics would say no. And he really hasn't done much outside of Star Wars. So when we're comparing him to Wagner, I mean, remember that Wagner wrote the Ring Cycle, the 4 operas of the Ring Cycle, based on this, the powers of the ring, very similar to Lord of the Rings. Matter of fact, Tolkien actually based some of the ideas from Lord of the Rings from stuff that he learned from Wagner. So there's a definite connection there. So we're looking at, he's writing like sci-fi, but Wagner also wrote Tristan und Isolde, which is one of the greatest love stories of all time, maybe after Romeo and Juliet. So we got a big tearjerker there. He also wrote The Flying Dutchman. He also wrote Der Meistersinger, which is based on the real life person Hans Sachs. And those are more delightful. They're more lighthearted. They're funnier. They're not quite so heavy. But then he also wrote Parsifal, his very last opera, which is basically related to King Arthur and the Holy Grail, and very, very heavy subject again. So we see him, Wagner, writing in a variety of different styles of operas. They're not just all kind of big, long, and heavy, which they are, but he writes a variety of styles. More lighthearted in some cases than others. So really, in finding a comparison, the only one who really fits that is Steven Spielberg. And if we examine his movies, we see a lot of the same thing. This is the same director who did The Color Purple and Schindler's List, but he's also the same director who did Jurassic Park. He's also the same one who did E.T., Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I think some of his finest movies, I think Minority Report, AI, and the remake he did of War of the Worlds are all epic films. And if you're like, but wait a minute, you're talking about really the music of John Williams. Yes, we're talking about the music of John Williams, but John Williams isn't coming up with all of these ideas and writing the script and coming up with the costume designs. He's principally writing the music. And in that endeavor, he is very good. And he is very Wagnerian. I mean, if you really break down the music of John Williams, he's really a combination of the music of Wagner, Ravel, and Prokofiev. Really, he's kind of taking elements from those, and Dvorak, if you include Jaws and a little bit from Dvorak's Symphony No. 9, which he directly stole from that. So it's pretty obvious. So, really when we look at his music, he's really using Wagnerian style because of its heavy dramatic content. And the same thing with the music of Ravel and Prokofiev. So he's only writing the music. He's really kind of the right arm of either Lucas and or Spielberg. So he himself is not the Wagner. So we look again to Spielberg, who is using John Williams to create music to great dramatic effect. And there are a number of great examples. We can look at the example from Schindler's List. That absolutely beautiful melody, which very much evokes the spirit of the people who were being persecuted in that movie, the Jewish people. So it embodies those elements. We look at what he did in AI and how Stanley Kubrick it is, and how John Williams made the adjustments in that film to be less like John Williams and more like music that Stanley Kubrick would want. So that's also an interesting ways. But it's really Spielberg that's manipulating Williams, getting Williams to come up with just the right music. And of course, like I said, Williams is brilliant in that endeavor. And should be praised for what he does there musically, giving these films such gravitas. But it's really Spielberg. it's really Spielberg that is the Wagner. He's the control freak. He's thinking about the sets. He's thinking about the costumes. He's thinking about where we are dramatically in the story. He's coming up with stories. He's adapting other stories from books and from previous movies alike. So we see him kind of with his level of success. And really, I think if you just were to take people off the street, hold a microphone in front of them and say, who's the greatest movie director of all time? You're going to get Scorsese, you're going to get a wide variety of people. But I think a lot of people are so moved by the movies of Spielberg that we've come to just associate him with a quality production. No matter what it is, what genre it resides in, it's still going to be a quality movie, and we're going to feel something. So, in looking at this topic, where's the Wagner today? Who's the control freak? Who's the most control freakiest director? Who's had a variety of successes in different genres? Who's worked in very, very large scale productions? Who's been involved in creating a work of art, a film that is moving, that can be watched time and time again and enjoyed with new and different elements each time? That's Wagner. You can hear a Wagner piece multiple times and get something different from it each time, because very often it reflects you, the viewer, and you, the listener, with Wagner. Very much that's true with Spielberg. Very often when we go into a Spielberg movie, E.T., that's such a moving film, and we can relate to the boy character and what he's going through in his life. But it's really part of us that connects us, and I think that's the reason why Poltergeist was so successful too. I think Craig T. Nelson, we all kind of related to this suburban dad who's dealing with this crazy situation. So I think Spielberg has a way of tapping in to the viewer in a very personal sense, and I think for people who are fans and lovers of Wagner, that's true as well. We're also seeing how Spielberg is affecting newer directors, people like J.J. Abrams and things like that. And of course, we can see this with Wagner, and he had a tremendous influence, for example, on Mahler, but really on all music that came after him, including Debussy. So we see a variety of influences from both of these guys, and I think as time goes forward, we'll see more and more and more the influence of Steven Spielberg on future movie directors. Coming up next week, we've got an exciting episode where we're going to talk about Anoushka Shankar, who is, of course, the daughter of Ravi Shankar and sister of Nora Jones. After that, we are going to do a review of Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a theme by Paganini. So thank you for joining us today on Dr. Todd Talks Tunes. Please subscribe to our channel and tune in again with us in the future. Thank you for watching.